Officer Jake had never been a believer in fate, destiny, or any of that spiritual nonsense his mother always talked about over Sunday dinners. He was a practical man, a by-the-book cop who relied on training, discipline, and hard work. But all of that changed on a scorching July afternoon 4 years ago at the Phoenix K-9 Academy, when a 2-year-old German Shepherd named Rex walked into his life and turned everything he thought he knew upside down. Jake had been selected for the K-9 unit after 5 years of exemplary service with the Phoenix Police Department. It was an honor he'd worked tirelessly to achieve, knowing that only the best officers were chosen for this elite assignment. The selection process had been brutal: physical fitness tests, psychological evaluations, situational assessments, and countless interviews. Out of 47 applicants, only 6 had made it through. Jake was one of them, and he was determined to prove he deserved to be there. The day of partner selection had arrived with the usual Arizona intensity, temperatures pushing 115 degrees, the air so dry it felt like breathing through sandpaper. Jake stood in a line with the other 5 selected officers in the Academy's vast outdoor training facility. Before them, 15 German Shepherds and Belgian were being led out one by one, each dog a specimen of peak physical conditioning, intelligence, and drive. These weren't pets. These were working animals, bred and trained for one purpose: to serve and protect alongside their human partners. The head trainer, a weathered veteran named Richard with 30 years of K-9 experience etched into the lines of his sun-damaged face, had explained the process. "You don't choose your partner," he'd said, his gravelly voice carrying across the field. "They choose you. We've learned over decades that the dogs know. They can sense something in you, your energy, your spirit, something we humans can't quantify. When a dog chooses you, that's your partner, that's fate, and you don't argue with fate." Jake had nodded along with the others, but internally he'd rolled his eyes. It all seemed like mystical nonsense designed to make the moment feel more significant than it was. These were well-trained animals, nothing more. The connection people talked about was probably just confirmation bias, handlers projecting meaning onto random animal behavior. Then Rex emerged from the kennel facility. Jake noticed him immediately. The German Shepherd was magnificent, sleek black and tan coat gleaming in the harsh sunlight, muscles rippling beneath his fur with each confident stride, intelligent dark eyes scanning the line of officers with an intensity that was almost unsettling. While the other dogs had trotted out eagerly, distracted by sounds and smells and the excitement of new people, Rex moved with purpose. His handler struggled slightly with the lead as Rex pulled forward, but not with the chaotic energy of the younger dogs. Rex was pulling because he was looking for something, or someone. The dog walked past the first officer without a glance, past the second. The third officer, a muscular guy named who Jake knew wanted a K-9 partner more than anything, dropped to one knee and called out softly, hopefully. Rex's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound, but he kept walking, past the fourth officer, past the fifth. And then Rex stopped directly in front of Jake. For a long moment, dog and man simply stared at each other. Jake felt something he couldn't explain, a jolt of recognition, as if he were looking at someone he'd known his entire life but was only now meeting for the first time. Rex's tail wasn't wagging. The dog wasn't exhibiting any of the excited, playful behavior the other K-9s had shown. Instead, Rex simply sat down at Jake's feet with perfect precision, never breaking eye contact, and released a single, soft exhale that sounded almost like contentment. "Well, I'll be damned," Trainer had said, walking over with a smile that transformed his usually stern face. "That's the fastest I've ever seen Rex make a decision. He's been evaluating handlers for 3 months, walked past 42 candidates without a second glance. I was starting to think he'd never choose, but he just chose you. He chose you in about 15 seconds." Jake had reached down with a slightly trembling hand and touched Rex's head. The dog leaned into the touch, closing his eyes briefly, and in that moment, Jake felt something shift in his chest, a door opening to a connection he'd never experienced before. Maybe his mother had been right all along. Maybe some things couldn't be explained by training manuals and logic. That was 4 years ago, and every single day since had only deepened that inexplicable bond. Jake and Rex became legendary at the Phoenix Police Department. They worked patrol together in some of the city's toughest neighborhoods, where summer heat turned tempers explosive and violence lurked in every shadow. Rex had an uncanny ability to sense danger before Jake's human instincts could register it. There was the time they'd responded to a seemingly routine noise complaint, and Rex had frozen at the doorway, refusing to let Jake enter. 30 seconds later, gunfire erupted from inside, a domestic dispute that had turned lethal. Rex's warning had saved Jake's life that night. Then there was the missing 5-year-old girl, wandered away from her backyard during a monsoon storm. Search teams had scoured the desert for 8 hours in driving rain, finding nothing. Rex had picked up her scent from a stuffed animal and tracked her for 3 miles through flash flood warnings and lightning, never hesitating, never stopping, until they found her huddled beneath an overhang, hypothermic but alive. The grateful mother had sobbed into Rex's fur while Jake called for medical assistance. At home, Rex was a different kind of partner. Jake's 8-year-old son Tommy had been struggling with anxiety after his parents divorced 2 years ago. The boy had nightmares, wouldn't sleep alone, was falling behind in school, but Rex seemed to understand. Without any training, the dog began sleeping beside Tommy's bed every night, one protective paw stretched toward the child. When Tommy woke from nightmares, Rex was there, pressing his solid warmth against the boy until the trembling stopped. Tommy's therapist called it animal-assisted therapy. Jake called it love. Jake's ex-wife Maria had, but she'd been the one to insist Tommy spend every possible moment with Jake and Rex. "That dog is healing our son," she'd told Jake with tears in her eyes. "Whatever you and Rex are doing, don't stop." At the precinct, Captain, the same who'd hoped to partner with a K-9 himself, often joked that Jake and Rex shared one soul split between 2 bodies. "I've never seen anything like it," he'd say, shaking his head in wonder. "Knows what that dog is thinking, and that dog knows what needs before he needs it. It's supernatural." Rex slept beside Jake's bed every night, one ear always alert even in sleep. If Jake's alarm didn't go off, Rex would wake him with a gentle nose nudge at exactly 5:30 a.m. If Jake was having a bad day, and cops had plenty of those, Rex would press against his leg, offering silent support. When Jake's father died last year, Rex had stayed glued to his side through the funeral, the wake, and the long, dark weeks of grief that followed. They weren't just partners. They were family in the truest sense of the word. Jake trusted Rex with his life. Rex had proven, time and again, that he would give his life for Jake without hesitation. But neither of them knew that this bond was about to be tested in a way that would defy everything they'd been trained for. A test that would require Rex to make an impossible choice and do something that no one thought a K-9 was capable of. The September heat was already building when Jake clipped Rex's lead that morning, both of them heading out for another shift. It seemed like any other day. It wasn't. Everything was about to change. The September morning had started like any other. Jake and Rex completed their usual patrol route through downtown Phoenix, checking in with local business owners, monitoring the usual trouble spots, and grabbing coffee at Maria's Diner, where the owner always slipped Rex a bacon strip despite Jake's protests. The temperature was already climbing toward what meteorologists were calling dangerously hot, another day where the asphalt would become hot enough to fry an egg, where the elderly and vulnerable would be warned to stay indoors, where the desert sun beat down with an intensity that felt almost personal. By noon, the thermometer in Jake's patrol car read 108 degrees. By 2 p.m., it had climbed to 113. The air conditioning in the cruiser worked overtime, and Jake made sure Rex had plenty of water. K-9s were especially vulnerable to heat exhaustion, and Jake had seen too many handlers get careless, too focused on the job to remember their partners had fur coats they couldn't remove. Unit 247, Do you copy?" The radio crackled to life at 2:47 p.m., dispatcher Jenny's voice cutting through the monotony of the afternoon. Jake picked up the radio. "Unit 247, go ahead dispatch. We have a domestic disturbance call at 1847 Cactus Road. Neighbor reports hearing shouting and what might have been furniture breaking. Requesting welfare check. Approach with caution. Resident has a history." Jake's stomach immediately tightened into a familiar knot. He knew that address. He knew it well. "Copy that dispatch. En route to 1847 Cactus Road. ETA 7 minutes. Beside him, Rex's ears perked up at the change in Jake's tone. The dog could sense tension like humans sense a change in temperature, immediate and undeniable. Rex shifted in his compartment, moving from relaxed to alert in an instant. As Jake drove toward the address, his mind raced through his previous encounters with the resident. 53 years old, Army veteran, 2 tour in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient, PTSD diagnosis, 3 previous domestic disturbance calls, though lived alone now. His wife had left him 2 years ago, taking their teenage daughter with her. The calls were usually having episodes, sometimes breaking his own furniture, sometimes standing in his yard at 3 a.m. screaming at enemies only he could see. Jake had responded to 2 of those previous calls personally, was never violent toward officers, just broken, haunted, lost in memories of war that wouldn't let him go. Each time Jake had talked him down, gotten him to take his medication, contacted the VA crisis line, would apologize profusely, embarrassed and ashamed, promising to stay on top of his treatment. And for months at a time he would. Then something would trigger him. A firework, a car backfiring, a news report, and the cycle would begin again. "This is a welfare check, boy," Jake said to Rex as they turned onto Cactus Road. "Probably nothing, just having a rough day. We've done this before." But even as he said the words, something felt different. Wrong. Jake had learned to trust his instincts over 7 years on the force. That little voice in the back of his head, the one that whispered warnings, had kept him alive more times than he could count. And right now, that voice was screaming. The street was quiet, eerily so. Most of the residents were inside, hiding from the brutal heat. The houses were typical Arizona ranch-style homes, stucco and tile roofs, yards filled with desert landscaping and struggling cacti. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, isolated from the others, with an empty lot on one side and undeveloped desert stretching behind it. As Jake pulled up to the curb and killed the engine, he studied the property. His old Ford pickup was in the driveway, meaning he was home. But the front door, Jake's pulse quickened. The front door was standing wide open, swinging slightly in the hot desert wind. In 113-degree heat, nobody left their door open unless something was seriously wrong. Jake reached for his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 247 on scene at 1847 Cactus Road. Front door is open, requesting backup." "Copy that 247. Nearest unit is 14 minutes out. Do you want to wait for backup?" Jake hesitated. 14 minutes was a long time. If was having a medical emergency, if he'd fallen or hurt himself, 14 minutes could be the difference between life and death. Jake had a duty to check on him. "Negative, dispatch. Proceeding with caution. Will update shortly." Jake opened his door and the heat hit him like a physical wall, oppressive, suffocating, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like work. He opened Rex's compartment and the K9 jumped down, immediately moving into working mode. But something was off. Rex's behavior had changed dramatically. The dog's hackles were raised, the fur along his spine standing straight up in a ridge of warning. His ears were pinned back flat against his skull. His body had gone rigid, every muscle tensed, and a low, rumbling growl was building in his chest. This wasn't Rex's usual alert behavior. This was fear, or recognition of imminent danger. "Rex, what is it, boy?" Jake whispered, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. He'd learned years ago to trust Rex's instincts even more than his own. If Rex sensed danger, there was danger. They approached the house slowly, Jake's hand on his holstered, Rex moving in perfect synchronization beside him. The growling didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to wait for backup, but his duty to check on a potentially injured veteran pushed him forward. Jake called out from the front walkway, his voice carrying across the desert-silent yard. "It's Officer with Phoenix PD. We got a call about a disturbance. Are you all right?" Nothing. Just the whisper of hot wind through the dry desert plants and the distant hum of air conditioners working overtime. "I'm coming in to check on you. I just want to make sure you're okay." Jake's foot hit the first porch step. Rex's growl became a sharp bark of warning, a sound Jake had only heard a handful of times, always right before something terrible happened. Jake froze, his hand closing around his weapon. That's when appeared in the doorway. But this wasn't that Jake had talked down before. This wasn't the embarrassed veteran who apologized for disturbing his neighbors. This was someone else entirely, someone with wild, unfocused eyes that darted around as if tracking enemies Jake couldn't see. His face was gaunt, his clothes disheveled, and his hands were shaking violently. But it was what he was holding that made Jake's blood turn to ice. A Remington 870 shotgun, 12 gauge, pump action. The barrel was pointing down, but his finger was on the trigger. Jake said slowly, carefully, his hand still on his weapon but not drawing it. "Hey, it's me. It's Officer, remember. We've talked before. I'm here to help you, buddy. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together." His eyes found Jake's face, and for a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, there was recognition there. There was the man Jake had spoken with before, the veteran who was trying so hard to hold his broken mind together. "I'm sorry," whispered, and tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Officer, I can't do this anymore. They won't stop. They're everywhere, in my head, in my house. I can't make them stop." "Who won't stop? Talk to me. Let me help you." "The screaming," said, his voice breaking. "The bodies, the children I close my eyes and they're there. I open them and they're still there. I can't escape. I've tried everything. The medication doesn't work anymore. Nothing works. I just want it to stop. I just want peace." Jake's mind raced. This was a psychiatric crisis. Wasn't responding to reality. He was trapped in traumatic memories, probably experiencing severe hallucinations. Jake needed to de-escalate, needed to get to put down the weapon, needed backup to arrive immediately. "I understand you're in pain. I can see that. But I can help you. We can get you to the VA hospital. They have people who specialize in this, who can help you find that peace you're looking for. But I need you to put the shotgun down first, okay? Just set it down gently and—" "I'm sorry," said again, and this time his voice was different, resolved, final. The shotgun came up, not pointed at Jake, pointed at its own head. "No," Jake shouted, his hand finally drawing his weapon, though he had no intention of using it. "Don't, please, just wait." But wasn't pointing the gun at himself anymore. In his confused, hallucinating state, something had shifted. His paranoid mind had transformed Jake from helper to threat. The barrel swung toward Jake with terrible speed. Jake had maybe half a second to react. His training kicked in. He was already moving, already diving to the side, already reaching for Rex to pull the dog to safety. But he was too slow. The shotgun roared, a deafening explosion that echoed across the quiet neighborhood like thunder. Jake felt the impact before he heard the sound, a massive force slamming into his chest like he'd been hit by a car. His body lifted off the ground and flew backward, suspended in air for a moment that seemed to last forever. Then he crashed onto the sun-scorched pavement, his head cracking against the asphalt with a sickening sound. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot agony radiating from his chest, his ribs, his lungs. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. Rex was barking, a frantic, desperate sound, but it seemed to come from very far away. Jake tried to call out, tried to reach for his radio, but his arms wouldn't respond. He could taste blood in his mouth. His vision was already darkening at the edges, reality tunneling down to a pinpoint of awareness. Somewhere in the distance, he heard screaming, heard footsteps running away into the desert. But Jake couldn't process it. All he could process was the pain, the heat of the pavement beneath him, and the terrible, overwhelming certainty that he was dying. His last conscious thought before darkness claimed him was of Tommy, his son's face, his son's smile, and the fact that he'd never get to say goodbye. The pain was beyond anything Jake had ever imagined possible. It wasn't just physical, it was existential, all-consuming, a fire that burned through every nerve ending in his body. He lay sprawled on the blistering asphalt of Cactus Road, unable to move, unable to cry out, unable to do anything except experience the agony in waves that crashed over him again and again. His tactical vest had stopped some of the buckshot, the ceramic plates doing exactly what they were designed to do, absorbing impact that would have killed him instantly. But shotgun blasts spread. At close range, the pattern was tight but not tight enough. Pellets had found their way around the vest's protection, tearing into his left shoulder, his abdomen, his right side. Jake could feel the hot, sticky wetness of blood soaking through his uniform, pooling beneath him on the scorching pavement that had to be at least 160 degrees in the direct Arizona sun. Each breath was a knife wound. Each heartbeat sent fresh waves of agony radiating through his chest. He tried to move his right arm, the one that wasn't screaming with shoulder pain, toward his radio, but his body wouldn't respond. The impact and the fall had done something to his spine, or maybe it was shock, or maybe he'd simply lost too much blood already. His limbs felt distant, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. Through dimming vision, Jake could see his patrol car parked at the curb, maybe 30 feet away. 30 feet might as well have been 30 miles. His radio was inside the vehicle. His phone was crushed in his pocket. He'd felt it shatter when he hit the ground. The backup he'd requested was still at least 10 minutes away, maybe more. They didn't know he'd been shot. They thought he was conducting a routine welfare check. The sun beat down on him with merciless intensity. Jake had responded to enough heat exposure calls to know what was happening to his body. The 113-degree temperature was bad enough for a healthy person. For someone bleeding out on sun-heated asphalt, it was accelerating everything. Dehydration, shock, organ failure. The heat was cooking him alive while his blood drained away. He tried to call out, tried to scream for help, but all that emerged was a wet, gurgling sound, blood in his lungs. One of the pellets must have punctured something vital. Jake had seen enough gunshot wounds in his career to recognize the signs. Sucking chest wound, tension pneumothorax. Without immediate medical intervention, he had minutes, not hours. The houses around him remained silent. Everyone was inside, sheltering from the heat, air conditioners drowning out any sounds from the street. The nearest neighbor was easily a quarter-mile away across empty lots and desert scrub. No one had heard the gunshot, or if they had, they dismissed it as a car backfiring or construction noise. No one was coming to help. Was gone. Jake had heard him running, his footsteps crunching through the desert behind his house, fleeing into the wilderness in his paranoid, hallucinating state. Part of Jake understood hadn't meant to shoot him. The man was trapped in his own personal hell, seeing enemies that didn't exist, fighting wars that had ended years ago. But understanding didn't change Jake's current reality. He was alone, dying, and nobody knew. The irony wasn't lost on him. 7 years as a cop, hundreds of dangerous calls, armed robberies, high-speed chases, domestic violence situations that could turn deadly in a heartbeat, drug busts where suspects came out shooting. Jake had survived all of it without a scratch, and now he was going to die on a quiet residential street, responding to a welfare check, killed by a man he'd been trying to help. His vision was narrowing, the bright Arizona sky fading at the edges like someone was slowly closing curtains. Jake knew what that meant. Hypovolemic shock. His blood pressure was dropping, his brain being starved of oxygen. He was entering the final stage. Soon the darkness would be complete, and then nothing. Images flashed through his fading consciousness like he couldn't control. Tommy's face at his last Little League game, grinning with dirt on his cheeks after sliding into home plate. Maria, his ex-wife, laughing at one of his terrible jokes back when they'd been happy. His father's funeral 6 months ago, standing in the rain, realizing he was now alone in a way he'd never been before. His mother's voice on the phone last Sunday. "Be safe out there, Jacob. Promise me you'll be safe." He'd promised, he'd broken that promise. Jake thought about Tommy finding out his dad had died. The boy was already so fragile, so anxious, still healing from the divorce. This would shatter him. Who would help him through his nightmares now? Who would make sure he felt safe? Tears mixed with the blood on Jake's face, though he couldn't tell if he was actually crying or if it was sweat and blood creating the illusion. He wanted to fight, wanted to rage against what was happening, but his body was shutting down. The pain was beginning to fade, not because anything was getting better, but because his nervous system was giving up, surrendering to the inevitable. "I'm sorry, Tommy," Jake tried to whisper, though no sound came out. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I promised I'd always be there. I promised." The heat pressed down on him like a physical weight, crushing his chest, making each shallow breath harder than the last. The asphalt beneath him felt like it was burning through his skin, but Jake was losing the ability to feel it, losing the ability to feel anything. His body temperature was spiking, heat stroke combining with blood loss in a deadly cocktail that was accelerating his death. How long had it been? 2 minutes since he'd been shot. 5. Time had lost all meaning. Jake's mind was starting to drift, consciousness fragmenting into pieces that didn't quite connect anymore. He found himself thinking about random things. The bacon Rex had gotten at breakfast, the way morning light looked coming through his apartment window, the smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of Tommy's laughter. Beautiful things, simple things, the things that made life worth living, all of them slipping away like water through his fingers. Jake had faced his own mortality before. Every cop did, every time they put on the badge. But he'd always believed that when his time came, it would be quick. A bullet to the head, over before he knew it. He'd never imagined this, dying slowly, alone, baking on a street corner while his life bled out onto the pavement. This was a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His breathing was becoming more labored, more desperate. His lungs were filling with fluid, drowning on dry land. It was one of the worst ways to go, and Jake was experiencing every terrible second of it. The darkness was closing in faster now, the tunnel of his vision narrowing to almost nothing. The bright Arizona sky was just a pinpoint of light, getting smaller, dimmer. Jake felt himself falling backward into an abyss, slipping away from the world, from Tommy, from everything. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with glory or heroism or any of the ways cops imagined going out. Just alone on a hot street, forgotten, dying for nothing. Jake's last coherent thought was a prayer, not to God because he wasn't sure he believed, but to the universe, to fate, to whatever force might be listening. "Please, someone find me, someone help. Please don't let Tommy grow up without a father. Please." But the universe didn't answer. The darkness kept coming. And Jake, veteran Phoenix police officer, loving father and dedicated servant of his community, prepared to die. He had lost all hope. His eyes closed for what he believed would be the final time. But he had forgotten something, something vitally important. He wasn't alone on that street. Rex was there. And Rex had other plans. Rex stood frozen in the scorching Arizona sun, his entire body trembling. The gunshot had been so loud it had momentarily deafened him, and the acrid smell of gunpowder burned his sensitive nose. But none of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the man lying motionless on the pavement in front of him, the man who was his entire world. The German Shepherd's training had been extensive, drilled into him through thousands of hours of repetition until responses became instinct. K9 protocol was clear, unambiguous, carved into his muscle memory through countless scenarios. When a suspect flees, you pursue. When a suspect runs, you track. When your handler gives the command or when a threat escapes, you chase them down without hesitation. That was the job. That was what Rex had been bred for, trained for, lived for. Scent trail was fresh and obvious, leading away from the house into the desert. Rex's nose picked up every detail, the sweat, the fear, the medication in his system, the path he'd taken through the scrub brush and cacti. Every instinct in Rex's body screamed at him to pursue. The suspect was getting away. The threat was escaping. His training demanded action. But Jake wasn't moving. Rex approached his partner cautiously, whimpering softly. He nudged Jake's face with his nose, a gesture that had woken his handler on countless mornings, a familiar touch that had always brought a smile and a scratch behind the ears. But this time Jake didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his face was pale beneath the blood, and his chest was barely moving. The smell of blood was overwhelming, metallic, wrong everywhere. It pooled beneath Jake's body, soaking into the porous asphalt, and Rex could see it spreading. So much blood, too much blood. The dog let out a high-pitched whine of distress, pawing gently at Jake's shoulder. Nothing. He licked Jake's face, tasting salt and copper, trying to wake him through sheer force of will. Still nothing. Rex began to pace in tight, anxious circles around his fallen partner, his training warring with something deeper, something primal that transcended any command he'd ever been taught. Then Rex lifted his head and howled, a sound of pure anguish that echoed across the empty street and out into the desert beyond. It was a cry that spoke of loss, of fear, of desperation. It was a sound that came not from training but from the soul, from the place where love lived deeper than any command or protocol. The howl faded into the hot afternoon air, unanswered. The houses remained silent. No one came. Rex was alone with his dying partner on an empty street, and he had to make a choice that no K9 training manual had ever prepared him for. His head swiveled toward the desert. His trail was still there, still fresh, calling to every trained instinct in his body. Rex could catch him in minutes. The man was old, slow, confused, leaving a trail a puppy could follow. Rex's training demanded he go. Protocol demanded he go. Years of conditioning demanded he go. But if he went, Jake would die alone. Rex looked back at his partner, at the man who had chosen him 4 years ago, who had trained him with patience and kindness, who had never struck him or raised his voice in anger, who had played with him after shifts and made sure he got the bacon at breakfast even when he wasn't supposed to. The man whose home smelled like safety. The man whose small son, Tommy, buried his face in Rex's fur when the nightmares came. The man who was family in every way that mattered. The German Shepherd made his choice. He chose Jake. With a final glance at the desert trail, Rex turned his back on his training and moved to his partner's side. He grabbed Jake's tactical vest in his powerful jaws, feeling the weight of the unconscious man, and began to pull. It was impossibly hard. Jake was 220 pounds of dead weight, and the rough asphalt caught and dragged with every inch. Rex's neck muscles screamed in protest. His legs shook with effort. His paws scraped against the burning pavement until they began to bleed. But he didn't stop. Inch by agonizing inch, Rex dragged Jake across the pavement. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Rex could feel his own body temperature rising to dangerous levels. German Shepherds weren't built for this kind of heat, especially not while performing exhausting physical labor. His tongue hung out, his breathing came in desperate pants, and his vision began to blur from the exertion and heat. But still he pulled. Rex dragged Jake 10 feet, then 15, then 20. Each foot felt like a mile. The vest material cut into his mouth, but he held on. His paws left bloody prints on the asphalt, but he didn't stop. His entire body trembled with exhaustion, but he kept pulling, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up on the man who had never given up on him. After what felt like an eternity, Rex managed to drag Jake 30 feet across the scorching pavement, closer to the patrol car, closer to the street, closer to where someone, anyone, might see them. But it wasn't enough. They were still on a quiet residential street where everyone was inside hiding from the heat. No one was coming. No one could see them. Rex released Jake's vest and looked around desperately, his sides heaving with exhaustion. His military and police training had taught him to track, to attack, to defend, to search and apprehend. But no one had taught him how to call for help when his handler was dying. No training scenario had covered this. He was a dog, brilliant and loyal and brave, but still a dog. He couldn't speak, couldn't dial a phone, couldn't operate a radio. Or could he? Rex's eyes locked on the patrol car. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. Jake had left it open when he'd exited the vehicle, planning to return in just a few minutes. Rex could see into the interior, could see the radio mounted on the dashboard, could see the buttons and switches that Jake always used to talk to the crackling voice that came through the speakers. But Rex didn't understand radios. He didn't have the dexterity to press buttons or the ability to speak into a microphone. That option was useless to him. Then his gaze shifted to the steering wheel, to the center of the steering wheel, to the horn. Rex had been in that patrol car thousands of times. He'd heard that horn honk countless times in traffic when Jake needed to get someone's attention during emergencies. It was loud. It was attention-grabbing. It was communication in its simplest form. The German Shepherd gathered his remaining strength and launched himself through the open driver's side window, landing awkwardly on the front seat. The interior was like an oven, easily 140 degrees with the engine off and the doors closed. Rex could barely breathe in the suffocating heat, but he positioned his body carefully, balancing his weight on the seat, and then threw himself forward onto the steering wheel. The horn blared to life, a long, continuous sound that shattered the afternoon silence like a scream. Rex held himself there, pressing down with all his weight, his legs shaking, his body overheating, every muscle in his body crying out for relief. The horn kept blaring, and blaring, and blaring. It was a sound that didn't belong in this quiet neighborhood at this time of day. It was wrong, insistent, impossible to ignore. It was a cry for help that didn't require words. It was Rex doing what no K9 had ever been trained to do, abandoning protocol, ignoring his training, and making an impossible choice based not on conditioning but on love. The horn echoed down Cactus Road and out across the desert, carrying Rex's desperate message to anyone who might be listening. Help us. Please. Someone help us. My partner is dying and I don't know what else to do. The German Shepherd held his position on that horn, his body trembling with exhaustion and heat, his paws bleeding, his throat raw from howling and panting. He held it because he had to. He held it because Jake's life depended on it. He held it because 4 years ago a man had chosen him, and now he was choosing that man right back. The horn kept blaring into the hot afternoon air. And somewhere in the distance, someone finally heard it. Bill was 72 years old, retired from the Phoenix Fire Department after 41 years of service. He'd seen more tragedy, more death, more suffering than most people could imagine. He'd pulled children from burning buildings, performed CPR on heart attack victims in the street, cut people out of mangled car wrecks, and held the hands of dying strangers who needed someone, anyone, to be there in their final moments. Retirement should have meant peace, but Bill had learned that you never really retired from being a first responder. It was in your blood. It became who you were. On this brutally hot September afternoon, Bill was doing what he did every day at this time, watering his beloved cactus garden. His wife always laughed at the irony. "You live in the desert," she'd say, "surrounded by wild cacti, and you spend hours watering domestic ones." But Bill loved his garden. Each saguaro, each barrel cactus, each prickly pear was like a child to him. He knew their names, their ages, their quirks. It was meditation, therapy, and passion all rolled into one. He was adjusting the drip irrigation on a particularly stubborn golden barrel cactus when he first heard it, a car horn blaring in the distance. Bill paused, listening. Car horns weren't unusual in Phoenix. Road rage, impatient drivers, people honking at their kids to hurry up. But this was different. This horn wasn't stopping. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The sound continued, steady and unrelenting, cutting through the afternoon heat like a siren. Bill frowned, straightening up and looking toward the sound. It was coming from somewhere down Cactus Road, maybe a quarter-mile away. Probably just someone's kid leaning on the horn, or a malfunction, or a driver who'd passed out from the heat with their head on the wheel. Bill turned back to his cacti, not his problem. He was retired. He'd earned the right to mind his own business. But the horn didn't stop. 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. The continuous blaring began to feel wrong, urgent, desperate, like a scream that wouldn't end. Bill set down his watering can, that old instinct rising up from deep in his chest where it had lived for 4 decades. Something was wrong. He knew it the way a sailor knows a storm is coming, the way a mother knows her child is hurt even before she sees the injury. Probably nothing, he muttered to himself, but his feet were already moving toward his old Ford pickup truck parked in the driveway. Appeared at the front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Bill, where are you going?" "Just checking something out. That horn's been going for over a minute now. Something's not right." Had been married to a firefighter for 47 years. She knew better than to argue when he got that look in his eyes. "Be careful," was all she said. Bill climbed into his truck and started the engine, following the sound of that relentless horn. His arthritic knees ached, a souvenir from years of climbing ladders and kneeling on hot pavement, but he ignored the pain. As he drove down Cactus Road, the sound grew louder, more insistent. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The horn never stopped, never faltered. When Bill turned the corner and saw the scene in front of him, his blood turned to ice. A police cruiser sat at the curb, its door hanging open, and inside he could see a German Shepherd pressing its full weight against the steering wheel, maintaining that desperate horn blast. But it was what lay on the pavement that made Bill's heart nearly stop. A police officer, sprawled motionless in a spreading pool of blood that looked almost black against the gray asphalt. "Jesus Christ," Bill whispered, his training exploding back to life after 6 years of retirement. He slammed his truck into park and was moving before he'd even fully processed what he was seeing. His hand fumbled for his cell phone as he ran, a shuffling, limping run that was all his 72-year-old body could manage, and he dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency?" "Officer down," Bill shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Officer down on Cactus Road. Gunshot wounds, massive bleeding. Send everything you've got, ambulance, police, air support. Now, 1847 Cactus Road." "Sir, can you confirm?" "I'm a retired fire captain with Phoenix FD, 41 years of service. I know what I'm looking at. Get help here now." The dispatcher's tone changed immediately, all business. "Units are responding. Stay on the line, sir. Can you assess the officer's condition?" Bill was already kneeling beside Jake, his knees screaming in protest as they hit the scorching pavement, but he didn't care. His hands that had performed these same motions thousands of times, went immediately to Jake's neck, searching for a carotid pulse. For a terrible moment he felt nothing. Then there, faint, thready, irregular, but there. The officer was alive, barely. Pulse is weak and rapid. Breath sounds are diminished on the left side, probable or pneumothorax. Multiple penetrating wounds to the chest and abdomen. He's in severe hypovolemic shock. I need that ambulance here 5 minutes ago. Rex had jumped out of the patrol car the moment Bill arrived and now stood beside his fallen partner, barking frantically, his whole body quivering with distress. The dog's paws were bleeding, His tongue was lolling out in dangerous heat exhaustion, but he wouldn't leave Jake's side. "It's okay, boy," Bill said softly, even as his hands worked with practiced efficiency. "Good dog. You did so good. You saved him. Now let me help." Bill ripped open Jake's uniform shirt, exposing the wounds. The officer's tactical vest had saved his life from the center mass of the blast, but pellets had found their way around it. Bill could see at least 4 entry wounds, maybe more, and the bleeding was severe. He pressed his hands against the worst of them, a wound just below on the left side that was pumping blood with each weak heartbeat. "Come on, officer," Bill muttered, applying pressure. "Stay with me. Don't you dare die on me. That dog of yours just did something I've never seen in 40 years of emergency response. He just saved your life in the most incredible way. You don't get to waste that. You hear me? You stay alive." Jake didn't respond. His face was ashen, his lips were blue, and his breathing was becoming more labored. Bill could see the officer's chest moving unevenly, the left side barely rising at all. Definitely a collapsed lung, possibly worse. Without immediate surgical intervention, this man had minutes, not hours. Bill grabbed his shirt and ripped it off his own back, wadding it up and using it to apply more pressure to the wounds. The heat was overwhelming, sweat pouring down his face, his own heart pounding dangerously fast for a man his age with a history of cardiac issues. But Bill hadn't saved hundreds of lives over 4 decades by giving up when things got hard. "Dispatch, where's my ambulance?" He barked into his phone, which he'd switched to speaker and placed on the ground beside him. 2 minutes out, sir. Helicopter is being dispatched from medical center." 2 minutes might be too long. This officer is critical. Tell them to push it. Rex suddenly pressed his body against Bill's side, whimpering, and the old firefighter felt tears spring to his eyes. This dog, this incredible, loyal, brilliant dog, had done everything in his power to save his partner. He'd made an impossible choice, abandoned his training, dragged a man twice his size across burning pavement, and figured out how to call for help using a car horn. It was the most remarkable act of loyalty and intelligence Bill had ever witnessed. "Your partner's going to make it," Bill told Rex, though he wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or just hopping desperately that it was true. "We're not going to let him die, not after everything you did. I promise you, boy, I promise." In the distance, Bill finally heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens. Multiple sirens growing louder, coming fast. The cavalry was arriving. Help was coming. Bill kept pressure on the wounds, kept talking to the unconscious officer, kept fighting to keep life flowing through a body that was trying so hard to give up. And beside him, Rex stood guard over his fallen partner, never leaving, never wavering, his mission complete but his vigil just beginning. On a scorching afternoon on a quiet street in Phoenix, an impossible miracle had just unfolded. A dog had done what no training had taught him. A retired firefighter had been in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. And against all odds, Officer Jake was still alive. The sirens grew louder. Help had arrived. The helicopter rotors beat the air with a deafening rhythm as flight medic Sarah Torres worked over Jake's body with desperate precision. They'd been airborne for 7 minutes, 7 minutes during which Jake had coded twice, his heart simply giving up from massive blood loss and shock. And twice, Sarah had brought him back, her hands performing chest compressions with mechanical efficiency while her partner managed the airway and pushed medication through IV lines. "BP is 60/30 and dropping," shouted over the rotor noise, his eyes locked on the monitors that painted an increasingly grim picture. "Heart rate 140 and thready. We're losing him again, Sarah." "Not on my watch," Sarah growled through gritted teeth, her arms burning with exhaustion from continuous compressions. She'd been a flight medic for 12 years, had transported hundreds of critical patients, had seen every kind of trauma the human body could endure. But this case was different. This officer had been saved by his K-9 partner in a way that everything she'd been taught about animal behavior. That dog had done the impossible, and Sarah was damned if she was going to let that miracle be wasted. "Hang another unit of O-negative," she commanded, "and push another amp of. We need to get his pressure up or he's not going to make it to the trauma bay." They'd already pumped 4 units of blood into Jake during the initial stabilization on the ground and the flight. 4 units, nearly half his total blood volume replaced, and he was still bleeding internally. Sarah could see it in the distension of his abdomen, feel it in the way his body responded to her interventions. The buckshot had done catastrophic damage, likely tearing through his liver or spleen, possibly nicking his aorta. He needed a surgeon, and he needed one now. Below them, the Phoenix metropolitan area spread out in geometric patterns of streets and buildings, but Sarah didn't see any of it. Her world had narrowed to the monitors, the IV lines, the chest beneath her hands, and the desperate fight to keep life flowing through a body that was trying so hard to surrender. "Come on, officer," she said, her voice fierce and commanding even though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Your dog didn't drag you across burning pavement just so you could quit on me now. That K9 figured out how to call for help using a car horn, a goddamn car horn. You owe it to him to fight. You hear me? Fight." The monitor showed Jake's heart rate climbing 150, 155, 160. Too fast. Tachycardia from blood loss and shock. His body was trying to compensate for the catastrophic loss of circulating volume, his heart hammering desperately to pump what little blood remained. But hearts can only work so hard for so long before they simply give out. "Sarah, we're 3 minutes from medical center," the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. "Trauma team is standing by on the roof, but his rhythm is deteriorating. If we're going to lose him, it's going to be in the next 2 minutes." Sarah's jaw clenched. She'd lost patience before. It was an unavoidable reality of emergency medicine. But this one felt different. The image of that German shepherd standing over his partner, bleeding paws, heat exhausted but refusing to leave, had burned itself into her memory. The retired firefighter's account of how the dog had dragged a 220-pound man across scorching pavement, and then used the car horn to summon help. It was the kind of story that would be told and retold, the kind of loyalty that reminded people why dogs were called man's best friend. "Not today," Sarah whispered. "You're not dying today, Jake, not after what your partner did for you." Jake's monitor suddenly screamed an alarm, ventricular fibrillation. His heart had stopped again, this time going into a chaotic rhythm that couldn't pump blood effectively. Code blue. Again. "V-fib," shouted, charging to 200. Sarah grabbed the defibrillator paddles while applied the gel. In the confined space of the helicopter, there was barely room to work, barely room to breathe, but they'd trained for this scenario hundreds of times. Clear. The electrical shock jolted through Jake's body, making his back arch off the stretcher. Sarah's eyes locked on the monitor, watching, hopping, praying. The chaotic rhythm continued. No conversion. Again, 300 joules clear. Another shock, another terrible moment of waiting, and then there, a blip, a rhythm, sinus tachycardia, fast but organized. Jake's heart was beating again. "We've got him back," Sarah breathed, though her relief was tempered by reality. They'd gotten him back 3 times now. The question was whether his heart could survive a 4th code if it happened. 1 minute out, the pilot called. Trauma bay in sight. The Medical Center Trauma Center was one of the best in the Southwest, a Level I trauma facility that handled the region's most critical cases. As the helicopter descended toward the rooftop helipad, Sarah could see the trauma team assembled and waiting. A surgeon, 2 residents, 4 nurses, respiratory therapist, and multiple technicians, all dressed in trauma gowns, all ready to receive a dying cop and perform a miracle. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and the world exploded into controlled chaos. The doors flew open and hands reached in, experienced hands that knew exactly what to do. Jake was transferred to the waiting gurney in seconds, IV lines and monitor leads transferred with practiced efficiency. Officer Jake, 32 years old, Sarah rapid-fired as they ran toward the trauma bay entrance. Multiple penetrating shotgun wounds to chest and abdomen. Estimated 40% blood loss, probably more. He's coded 3 times, twice on scene, once in flight. Received 6 units O-negative, multiple rounds of epinephrine. BP 65/35, heart rate 165. Breath sounds diminished on left side, probable. Suspected abdominal bleeding, possibly liver or splenic laceration. The lead trauma surgeon, doctor, absorbed the information with the calm efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years saving lives in impossible situations. Okay, people, let's move. Get him to Trauma Bay 1. Someone call the OR and tell them we're coming up in 10 minutes. Type and cross for 10 more units. And somebody find out if this officer has family. They need to be immediately. As they burst through the doors into the hospital, Sarah finally let herself feel the exhaustion, the emotional weight of the last 30 minutes. But mixed with the exhaustion was something else, pride. She'd kept Jake alive long enough to give him a fighting chance. The rest was up to the trauma team and Jake's own will to live. She thought about that German shepherd, probably being examined by a veterinarian somewhere in the city, probably still anxious about his missing partner. That dog had training, instinct, everything expected of him because of love. Pure, unconditional, extraordinary love. "Fight Jake," Sarah whispered as the trauma team disappeared around a corner with their patient. "That dog gave you a miracle. Don't waste it." Maria was folding laundry in her apartment when her phone rang, an unknown number she almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. Maybe intuition, maybe fate, maybe just the fact that Jake was a cop and unknown numbers sometimes meant something was wrong. "Is this Maria, former spouse of Officer Jake?" The words former spouse sounded so cold, so distant, as if divorce had erased all the years they'd spent together, all the love they'd shared before things fell apart. "Yes, this is Maria. What's happened? Is Jake okay?" "Mrs., this is Sergeant Mike with Phoenix PD. I'm calling to inform you that officer has been involved in a critical incident. He's been shot and is currently in surgery at medical center." The laundry basket slipped from Maria's hands, clean clothes spilling across the floor. "What? When? How bad is it?" "Ma'am, I'm not going to lie to you, it's very serious. But he's alive and he's getting the best care possible. His K-9 partner, Rex, saved his life. I know you and Jake are divorced, but we have you listed as his emergency contact for medical decisions. And his son." "Tommy," Maria breathed, her hand going to her mouth. "Oh God, Tommy, he's at school. I need to pick him up. I need to get to the hospital. Is Jake going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the word die out loud. "The doctors are doing everything they can," Sergeant said gently. "Get to the hospital, Mrs. And if you believe in prayer, now would be a good time." Maria grabbed her keys with shaking hands and ran for the door. Divorce papers didn't erase love, didn't erase years of history, didn't erase the fact that Jake was Tommy's father and the boy's whole world. She had to get to that hospital. She had to be there if Jake woke up. And she had to figure out how to tell an 8-year-old boy that his father, his hero, the man who'd promised to always protect him, might not come home this time. The surgical waiting room at medical center had all the warmth of a morgue. Fluorescent lights that cast a sickly pallor over everything, uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed to prevent rest, and a television playing news no one was watching. Maria sat rigid in one of those chairs, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white, her eyes fixed on the double doors that led to the surgical suites beyond. Beside her, 8-year-old Tommy clutched his mother's arm, his small face pale and streaked with dried tears. "Is Dad going to die?" Tommy whispered for the 7th time in the past hour. Each time he asked, Maria's heart shattered a little more. "The doctors are doing everything they can, baby," she said, pulling him closer. "Your dad is strong, he's a fighter, and Rex saved him. Did you hear that part? Rex was so brave, so smart. He saved your dad's life." Tommy's lower lip trembled. "Can I see Rex, please, Mom? I want to see Rex." Maria didn't know how to explain that Rex was at the K9 facility across town, being treated for heat exhaustion and injured paws, probably as traumatized as the rest of them. "Soon, sweetheart, soon." The waiting room was filling with people. Officers in uniform arrived in waves, Jake's colleagues, his friends, men and women who wore the same badge and understood the terrible fragility of the thin blue line. Captain stood near the window, his usually commanding presence diminished by worry. Sergeant Mike paced constantly, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with the department and fielded calls from concerned officers. Bill, no relation to the sergeant, but the retired firefighter who'd kept Jake alive until the ambulance arrived, sat quietly in a corner, still wearing the blood-stained pants from his heroic intervention. He'd refused to leave until he knew whether the officer would survive. Maria had hugged him with desperate gratitude, this stranger who'd appeared at exactly the right moment. 6 hours, Captain muttered, checking his watch for the 100th time. "They've been in there for 6 hours. That can't be good, can it?" No one answered because no one knew. Trauma surgery was unpredictable. 6 hours could mean they were successfully repairing damage. Or it could mean Jake was dying on the table and they were throwing everything they had at keeping him alive. Maria's mind kept replaying the moment she'd picked Tommy up from school, the way his face had lit up when he saw her. He loved surprise early pickups, and then the way that joy had shattered when she'd told him about his father. Tommy had screamed, actually screamed, right there in the school parking lot, a sound of pure anguish that had drawn stares from other parents. The school counselor had appeared, offering help, offering sedatives, but Maria had just held her son while he sobbed and begged God not to take his daddy. Divorce had been necessary, she and Jake had grown apart, wanted different things, fought constantly, but it hadn't erased love. It had just transformed it into something different. Jake would always be the father of her child, the man she'd promised to love forever even if she couldn't live with him anymore. The thought of Tommy growing up without his father, the thought of Jake dying before they'd had a chance to repair their fractured friendship, was unbearable. "Mrs." A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. A woman in hospital chaplain attire stood before her, offering the kind of gentle smile people use around the grieving. "Would you like to come to the chapel? Sometimes prayer helps during the waiting." Maria shook her head. She couldn't move, couldn't leave this spot, because if she left, even for a moment, the doctors might emerge with news and she wouldn't be here to receive it. The chaplain nodded with understanding and moved away. Maria squeezed Tommy's hand and continued to wait. Across town at the Phoenix Police K9 facility, Rex lay in his kennel utterly motionless. The veterinarian, Dr. Lisa Park, had treated his torn paw pads, given him IV fluids for the heat exhaustion and cleared him medically. But emotionally, Rex was destroyed. He hadn't eaten in 18 hours, hadn't drunk water despite the dehydration. He simply lay by the kennel door, staring at it, waiting for Jake to appear the way he always did at the end of a shift. Waiting for the familiar voice saying, "Hey, boy, ready to go home." Waiting for a reunion that might never come. "He's grieving," Dr. Park told Sergeant over the phone. "I've never seen anything like it. He knows something terrible has happened to his partner, if Officer doesn't make it. I'm honestly worried about what will happen to Rex. Dogs can die of broken hearts, Sergeant. It's rare, but it happens." "He's going to make it," said with more confidence than he felt. "He has to, for his son, for Rex, for all of us." But the hours ticked by with no word from the hospital, and doubt began to creep in. At 9:47 p.m., exactly 7 hours and 33 minutes after Jake had been wheeled into surgery, the double doors finally opened. Doctor emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, her mask pulled down, her face impossible to read. The entire waiting room rose as one, every eye locked on her. "Family of Officer Jake," she said, her accent, Nigerian beautiful despite the circumstances, cutting through the tense silence. Maria stepped forward, Tommy clinging to her side. I'm his ex-wife. This is his son, please, please tell me. Doctor's exhausted face broke into a small smile, and Maria felt her knees nearly buckle with relief before the doctor even spoke. He's alive. The surgery was extensive and complicated, but officer is alive. The waiting room erupted, officers hugging, crying, thanking God and each other. Tommy burst into tears, this time tears of joy, and Maria pulled him against her while she sobbed into his hair. Bill sat back down heavily, covering his face with his hands. Captain turned away, his shoulders shaking. Doctor raised her hand for quiet. I need you all to understand, he's not out of danger yet. He coded twice more during surgery. We removed his spleen, repaired his liver, removed part of his left lung, and extracted 14 pieces of buckshot. He's lost an enormous amount of blood. The next 48 hours are critical. If he survives that, his prognosis improves significantly. But right now, he's in intensive care on a ventilator and heavily sedated. Can we see him? Maria asked, her voice breaking. Can Tommy see him? Not yet, maybe in a few hours. Right now, we need to stabilize him and watch for complications, infection, blood clots, organ failure, but Doctor paused and something like wonder crossed her face. I've been a trauma surgeon for 20 years. I've seen patients with half his injuries who didn't make it. By all medical logic, officer should have died on that street. The fact that he's alive at all is extraordinary. Someone up there is watching over him. And his K9 partner, I heard the story. That dog is a hero. Can we tell Rex? Tommy asked suddenly, his voice small but desperate. Can someone tell Rex that Dad's alive, please? Rex is probably so worried. Sergeant pulled out his phone immediately. I'll call the K9 facility right now. Rex deserves to know. At the K9 facility, Dr. Park answered her phone, listened to Sergeant's words, and then walked slowly to Rex's kennel. The German shepherd didn't even lift his head when she approached. His depression was that profound. Rex, Dr. Park said softly, opening the kennel door and kneeling beside the grieving dog. I just got news about Jake. He's alive, boy. Your partner is alive. He's hurt very badly, but he survived the surgery. He's going to be okay. You saved him, Rex. You saved his life. For a long moment, Rex didn't respond, as if he didn't believe or couldn't understand. But then his ears twitched. His head lifted slightly, and something shifted in his dark eyes, a spark of hope, of recognition, of understanding. Rex stood on shaky legs and pressed his nose against Dr. Park's hand, his tail giving the faintest, most tentative wag. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a dog beginning to hope again. That's right, boy, Dr. Park whispered, tears running down her face as she scratched behind his ears. Your partner is alive, and when he wakes up, he's going to want to see you. So you need to eat, need to rest, need to heal those paws. Can you do that for Jake? Rex looked toward the door one more time, then returned to his water bowl, and finally, after 18 hours of refusing, took a long drink. Miles away in the ICU, Jake lay surrounded by machines, tubes, and monitors, his body broken but his heart still beating, fighting, surviving, because miracles don't end after the first chapter. They're just beginning. The first thing Jake became aware of was sound, a rhythmic beeping that seemed to match the pounding in his chest, the soft whoosh of machines breathing for him, distant voices speaking in medical terminology he couldn't quite grasp. The second thing was pain, not the searing agony he remembered from the street, but a deep, drugged ache that told him his body had been through hell and was slowly finding its way back. The third thing, when he finally managed to open his eyes after 3 days of medically induced coma, was a face. Maria's face, tear-streaked and exhausted but smiling, hovering above him like an angel. Jake, she whispered, her hand finding his. Oh, thank God you're awake, you're really awake. He tried to speak, but a breathing tube prevented it. Tried to move, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Panic began to rise until Maria's hand squeezed his. "Don't try to talk. You're in the hospital. You were shot, but you're going to be okay. Tommy's here. He's just gone to get a nurse. You're going to be okay, Jake. You're going to be okay." But Jake's mind was elsewhere, searching for something, someone critically important. His eyes darted around the ICU room frantically, looking, seeking, and Maria understood immediately. "Rex," she said, and Jake's eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity. "Rex is fine, Jake. He's a hero. He saved your life. The doctors said you should have died on that street, but Rex, Jake, he did something incredible. He dragged you to safety and used your car horn to call for help. He saved you." Tears leaked from the corners of Jake's eyes, running down into the pillow. Rex, his partner, his brother, his friend. The dog who'd chosen him 4 years ago had chosen him again when it mattered most. Maria leaned close, her voice soft. "The hospital has a strict no animals policy, but everyone's heard the story. The nurses, the doctors, even the hospital administrator, they all want to meet Rex. They're making an exception, Jake. They're going to let him visit you, but you need to focus on getting better first, okay? No more scaring us like this." 5 days later, after the breathing tube had been removed and Jake could sit up slightly without agony consuming him, Sargent arrived with a special visitor. The nurses had prepared the ICU for something unprecedented, a K-9 visit to intensive care. They'd cleared it with infection control, obtained permission from the attending physicians, and even put down protective covering on the floor. When the elevator doors opened and Rex stepped out on a leash beside Sargent, the entire ICU floor went silent. Nurses stopped their rounds. Doctors paused their conversations. Everyone wanted to witness this reunion, the officer and the K-9 who'd all odds and logic to save each other. Rex's paws were still bandaged, wrapped in protective booties. He walked with a slight limp, his body still recovering from heat exhaustion and the physical trauma of that terrible afternoon. But the moment he rounded the corner and saw Jake's room, everything changed. His ears perked forward. His tail began to wag, and a soft whine escaped his throat, a sound of pure, desperate longing. "Go ahead, boy," Sargent said, unclipping the leash. "Go see your partner." Rex moved slowly at first, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing, couldn't trust that Jake was real and alive and waiting. But as he got closer to the bed, his pace quickened. He approached carefully, mindful of all the tubes and wires, and pressed his nose against Jake's hand, the hand that had scratched behind his ears 1,000 times, the hand that had fed him treats and thrown balls and guided him through training. Jake's hand moved, trembling with effort, and touched Rex's head. "Hey, boy," he whispered, his voice raspy from the breathing tube. "Good boy, you're such a good boy." And then Rex did something that made every person in that ICU cry. He carefully, gently climbed onto the hospital bed, avoiding Jake's injuries with uncanny precision, and laid his head on Jake's chest, right over his heart. Right over the heart that was still beating because Rex had refused to let it stop. The German shepherd released a long, shuddering sigh, as if a burden he'd been carrying for days had finally been lifted. Jake wrapped his arm around Rex as much as his injuries would allow, tears streaming freely down his face. "You saved me," he whispered into Rex's fur. "You broke every rule, ignored your training, and saved my life. How did you know? How did you know to use the horn?" Rex didn't answer, he couldn't, but the gentle pressure of his body against Jake's spoke volumes. Love doesn't need training. Loyalty doesn't follow rules. And sometimes, the most remarkable acts come not from what we're taught, but from what we feel in the deepest parts of our souls. Maria stood in the doorway with Tommy, both of them crying. Tommy had been terrified of seeing his father so broken, so fragile, surrounded by machines. But seeing Rex there, seeing the reunion between his dad and his best friend, made everything somehow bearable, made everything feel like it would eventually be okay. The story of Officer Jake and K-9 Rex spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up first, then national media, then international outlets. People around the world were captivated by the German Shepherd who'd abandoned his training to save his dying partner, who'd figured out how to call for help using a car horn, who'd literally dragged a man twice his size across burning pavement because love demanded it. 3 months later, at a ceremony attended by hundreds, Phoenix police chief stood at a podium with Jake, still recovering but standing upright in his dress uniform, and Rex beside him, wearing a special ceremonial collar. "Today," Chief said, her voice carrying across the crowded plaza, "we honor K9 Rex with the Medal of Valor, the first time in Phoenix Police Department history that this commendation has been awarded to a K9. But Rex isn't just a hero because of what he did. He's a hero because of what he represents, the extraordinary bond between officer and partner, the kind of loyalty that transcends training and protocol, and the reminder that sometimes the most human acts of courage come from those who aren't human at all." The crowd erupted in applause as Chief fastened the medal around Rex's neck. Rex sat perfectly still, as if he understood the significance, his intelligent eyes scanning the crowd before returning to Jake, always returning to Jake. But the ceremony was just the beginning. Rex's actions had sparked a nationwide conversation about K9 training. Departments across America began incorporating partner-down protocols into their programs, teaching dogs not just to pursue suspects, but to seek help when their handlers are incapacitated. Rex's story became a case study in police academies, a testament to the incredible intelligence and loyalty of working dogs. Jake returned to modified duty after 6 months, cleared for desk work but not field operations. The doctors said he'd made a miraculous recovery, though he'd carry the scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of his life. He couldn't run anymore, couldn't pass the physical requirements for patrol work, but he could teach. Today, 4 years after that terrible September afternoon, Jake stands at the Phoenix K9 Training Academy as the head instructor for handler-dog bonding and emergency response. Rex, now 10 years old with a distinguished gray muzzle and a slight arthritic limp, lies on a comfortable bed in the training center, supervising every class with the wisdom of a dog who's lived through the extraordinary. Young handlers come from departments across the country to learn from Jake, to hear the story firsthand, to understand that the bond between officer and K9 isn't just about obedience and commands. It's about trust, love, and the kind of connection that can literally save lives. Tommy, now 12, volunteers at the academy on weekends, helping care for the K9s in training. He's already decided he wants to be a K9 officer when he grows up, just like his dad, just like Rex. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons when the training is done and the academy is empty, Jake sits beside Rex in the Arizona sunset, scratching behind those familiar ears, and whispers the same words he's whispered 1,000 times since that day. "You saved me, boy. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Rex's tail wags slowly, contentedly, and he presses closer to the man who chose him years ago, the man he chose to save when it mattered most. Their story has become legend. Their bond has become inspiration, and their legacy continues every time a K9 handler looks at their partner and sees not just a working dog, but family. Because in the end, that's what Rex taught the world. That loyalty isn't just following orders, love isn't just obedience, and sometimes the most incredible miracles come on 4 paws and a beating heart that refuses to let go. The dying officer had lost all hope, but his loyal K9 did the unimaginable. And because of that, both of them lived to tell the tale.